Welcome to another episode of Elevated. Today we're going to be talking about content creation, and in particular, flow production. So some of the challenges that flow production deals with is the lack of communication and transparency in your production, and also the scalability. Having every moving part working as efficiently as possible is obviously the best way, and flow production can help in that manner. Fred, what's your take on flow production?
Well, flow production, it means really that you have to have a constant flow of assets going from camera to workflow to post-production. And it really means that nobody sits idle in the production process. Everyone has constantly something to do in the mode of operation. And from a strategic point of view or from an operational point of view, that might seem fantastic because you're optimizing the use of your resources.
Yeah, and you know, it's essentially that being able to shoe in anybody as well into the production. So if you have sets and somebody is not there the next day, for instance, but there's still work continuing, using the software and using the tools, someone can step into that position and immediately keep the production flowing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you can constantly move images to online faster, and you don't have to wait for the whole batch to be ready and prepared and done and uploaded and so on. So it really streamlines the process really efficiently.
Yeah, and you're making the most of the resources you have there, the human resources, and also your sets and all the space that you've allocated to your content production. You know, space is a huge consideration.
But it might seem that it's the perfect scenario for all the studios that are out there. And I can really understand that they're seeking to adhere to this way of working. But is it really for every studio or for every scenario? Well, we believe it isn't. To some extent, you really need to do batch photography. If you go on location, I mean, you might not be connected to a network. How are you going to do that? If you do model shoots, you might want to do a load of model shoots, and then you want to start, making your selection process. So it's really not, obvious that it works everywhere.
Yeah. So there are these specialist scenarios where, the specialist on that team, whether it be an art director or a photographer, needs to have an overview and a look at those assets before they continue down the flow production pathway. But flow production is I guess, has overall it's a flowing river and everything is going down
definitely
that way. But sometimes you need to have little subsections of your production that don't adhere to that, something specialist, maybe you're calling in a very talented person and they may not want to use your way of working, your methodology. They might have their own way of working. And that too has got to be sort of siloed into that flowing river at the end.
Exactly. And we do a lot of, pack shot photography may be extremely suited for it. But when we do on-set location or any special type of photography, we might want to focus on the creative part and getting all those assets, and then make a selection and then process all of those images in one batch. So it's really not very obvious when you look at it from a studio perspective.
So, but I mean, in the studio itself, if you're running your general production, that is set up for, en masse production, flow really works. Would you say it's probably 90% of the time it fits for a studio setup, like a standard studio production environment?
It depends on if you look at the number of products you're shooting, you might end up at the 90%. But if you look at the time people spend in the studio, and the studio work is, for the most part, a collaboration work. People are working interactively with each other doing production. And if you do a very specific model shoot, that may take a lot of resources. But if you do pack shot photography, that might take just one person. So in terms of resources, it's probably more to 50% in where you allocate your resources.
Are there any particular examples, you don't have to name names, but are there any particular examples where you've come across companies where that flow production works for only a small percentage or not at all?
Well, we've come across, when we talk to customers, they say, oh, we want to do flow production, but not fully. One company we talked to and one of our customers, they say, oh, we want to do flow production, but then at the end of the day, we want to ship them off, all the images in one batch to the post-production company to do the post-production. So when we get back in the morning, we have all the images ready. So then all of a sudden you have flow production for the major part of your process, but not for the post-production part. We have another case where they do a full week of shooting, and then they sort of start working with that and do selection, and they want to do selection by the end of the week because they're looking at the whole batch and they want to be consistent over the whole batch. So they want to pick up two products at the same time. They want to match them to each other. So it varies, and then we have others where they shoot things and they want to keep them flowing all the time. And they don't really do post-production at all. So we see all cases actually in production processes.
Yeah, I think I've experienced the same. I worked at a very, very large luxury retailer studio, and we had, by default, we didn't even know something called flow production existed, but we'd already kind of created our own system for doing that. And it was based on a few principles, though. Like, we had to make sure that the lighting was always consistent. Yeah. We had to make sure that the retouchers were all doing the same thing. Yeah. Because if you are in flow production, like to your point, you want everything to look consistent. But if you have variations in there, the post-production methodology you put in place doesn't necessarily fit that. If there's something outside the box, those images need to be handled in a different way. Yeah. They all need to be handled by the same person, ideally, because then you're going to match everything
with the same eye.
Yeah. So I can see the advantages of full-on flow. Yeah. And then I can see its pitfalls as well.
Yeah. And some of the challenges with flow productions is that you need to control all the step of the chain, from camera to workflow to post-production integration. All that needs to be sort of tightly connected technically as well. And for any studio, that can be a challenge, just achieving the technical connection between all these bits and pieces that you purchase from everywhere. Yeah. Even though it might be the dream scenario, it can take a lot of effort just getting everything together.
Yeah. And I think that comes nicely onto what our vision is for it. And our vision is a little bit more, let's say, Apple-like, coming out of the box, that we want to be able to provide all of the studio tools to enable productions of all types out of the box. So, lighting, tethering technologies.
Absolutely.
A bit of automation in there as well, and connections to widely used services like post-production services and so on. We don't want to limit, but we want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, you're saying something super important there, just not limiting, but enabling. So we want to enable, flow production, but we don't want to dictate how customers should operate. We want to give them the flexibility to choose. And they shouldn't be choosing on a studio level, but they should be choosing on a production level. So that if they're saying that one type of production needs flow production, they should be able to rig it. If they, at the same time, want to have a workflow where they need batch production, they should be able to have that as well.
Yeah. A scenario that just popped in my head right now is vendor imagery. Vendor imagery is another part that doesn't really fit into flow production, because you've got Each vendor may send something to you that's slightly different. You know, you might have a style guide, but they haven't adhered to it properly, or they don't even know about your style guide, and they just send you images, and you've got to make the most out of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And when you're a retailer and you do your purchasing, you won't purchase product by product. You will definitely purchase a bunch of products at the same time. So you will have a batch of imagery coming from your vendor where you have to make a selection. Should you use it, or should you do own production? So there are different takes on it.
Yeah. Cool.
What we do in our approach, as you said, it's since we do control both the hardware and the software, we can tie the point of capture tightly into the workflow of the studio. And we do tethering, we do control the light setting. That means that we can control the way imagery are flowing from point of capture. We do integration with third-party post-production agencies where we can also flow images through to the post-production partner. So we can support flow production, but at the same time, as I said, we don't want to dictate. So if you want to use that technology and just do batch production, that should be your choice, not ours.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think there's a lot of configuration that we can do, right? Or actually not do, let the users themselves do.
Yeah. No, we don't do any custom development whatsoever. We don't do any custom implementation when we implement. We do simply configuration. And once we train our customers, they can do the configuration themselves. We don't need, we shouldn't be dictating and controlling how they operate, and they shouldn't need us to work their studio.
Yeah.
We provide the tools, and they should sort of set the scenarios themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a really fantastic approach.
Yeah.
So if we're going to summarize what we've learned today, what we've discussed today, how would you best go about describing flow production?
Flow production is great when you get the technology to work. So you have from your camera to workflow to post-production, and it's great for a certain type of scenarios, but it doesn't fit everywhere. So you really need to have the opportunity to choose whether you want to do flow production or batch production, irrespectively of your studio rig. You should be able to decide that on production level.
And then configure the tools that you have available for that particular scenario.
Yeah. And if you have the tools that works seamlessly with each other, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Any other things top of mind?
No, I think that sums it up really good. Flow production is great, but it's not for everything. And the customer should decide where and when to use it, and where and when to use batch production.
Yeah,
and get the tools that work seamlessly.
Yeah. I think, flow production has really brought us a long way, and the reality is we can't live without software in our studio.
Yeah.
We've got too much work. We've got too many things too many moving parts to deal with. And we need software to track all that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on this. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into flow production and where it can be applied and where it's maybe best not applied. And we'll see you again very soon for another episode of Elevated.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers.